Kids have a right to become who they're capable of being. They come to you with all these different aspects of who they are. School choice meets that need precisely.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're talking with Lisa Graham Keegan. She was the Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction from 1995 to 2001. As a legislator in the Arizona legislature before that, she sponsored the most comprehensive charter school law in existence. She helped create Arizona state standards. She's been an advisor to John McCain, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jeb Bush, Newt Gingrich, and she is now the head of the Keegan Company and works with A for Arizona school choice and educational consultancy firms. And in 2013, you wrote a great memoir, which we'll talk about, Simple Choices. Lisa, we talk a lot when we talk about school choice about, okay, well, this will help increase test scores, this and that. What's the moral case for school choice?
Well, because education is how people sort of fulfill their humanity. It's not a small thing. So the moral case is that kids have a right to become who they're capable of being. And the other moral case I would make is for teachers themselves to be able to innovate. You see a need, you see a way you could reach a bunch of kids. Right. You should be able to do that, and that only happens in schools that work for them. You cannot meet every child's need with a system that is just sort of, we'll get 100 more kids, we need 100 more seats, we're going to have everybody's needs met by one system, one methodology. It doesn't work.
What holds them back in a kind of traditional or a conventional public school district or model?
So if you think about a private or a charter school or a market-driven school, if you and I wanted to create a school, we'd create a model first. And I'd say, well, what do you think? How should we do this? We'd sit down, we'd get it on paper, we'd say, Nick's going to do this, Lisa will do this, we're going to reach the kids this way. This is a great way to teach. There's a model before there's a school. In the traditional system, there's a school, just because there's kids. And then if we get around to building a model, there's a model. It's a very, I think, almost a demoralizing way to approach education, which should be just incredibly energizing and quite specific. With that comes the assumption that we just do the best we can. Mm-hmm. That's my least favorite expression in the industry. And I hear it every day. Well, we've got those kids. Yeah. Those, capital T, capital K. Those kids. And they're, you name it. They didn't have breakfast. Their parents don't care. They don't have money. Well, they have huge capacity, so I don't know.
How does this change that model? How does it flip it or fracture it or move past it?
It really just flips it on its head. I hate the way we fund schools, right? Just everything about it. Mm-hmm. First of all, I don't like drawing geographic boundaries and giving people proxy for kids, saying, oh, look, we drew a boundary, you get to educate everybody in there. Yeah. Why? There's a school across the street that literally across the block outside the boundary would be better for my child. I don't like it.
So, some school districts will be able to spend $20,000 per student, others can only scrape together $10,000. Is there a role for kind of equalization of per student funding at the state or at the federal level, or is that just missing a bigger picture?
So I wouldn't do it at the federal level. If I had my way with the magic wand, I would ask for state-funded programs based on the needs of kids. You put the money as close to the child as possible. I started saying years ago that we should have a backpack. Right. Money should go in there. Wherever the kids go, the money goes, because that's obviously a choice that's going to work for that family. Or they'll move and the money will move. Mm-hmm. So that's still the system I've been chasing for 25 years. I think it works because when it works for the child, the money's available to the school.
Talk about, a number of major school districts around the country in very different areas serving very different populations have tried backpack funding or something approaching it. What have the results been so far?
So far, nobody's done it full out. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are trying, and there are now entire companies that have come up around figuring out how to do this, how to take the old chart of accounts and move it to kids. To me, that's a marketplace sign that we're making huge progress. 20 years ago, none of those companies existed. So states are trying more and more. I know we're doing it in Arizona to try to get to transparency. What are the kids in your school worth? Right. Most states weight kids depending on their needs. Special ed gets more money, as it should. Learning the language gets more money, as it should. Some states weight poverty and they give you more money for that. So that money really attaches to the child, but you don't see it at the school site, right? So that's the next game, right? Let's see it.
Talk a little bit about the scholarship programs and the tax incentives that go into that for people who don't necessarily have kids in the school system to fund school scholarships
Private
and things like that,
scholarships,
that are in Arizona and a couple of other places.
So in 1997, we started a tuition tax credit program, one for private schools, meaning that anybody with any income tax liability can use a portion of that and send it to a scholarship organization. And then we created another one for public schools so that they could use it for extracurriculars, a smaller amount. But that's been hugely successful, and over the past couple of years, we've added education savings accounts for private schools.
So, and that works like a medical savings account or a health savings account?
It's a debit card, and it really is money following kids.
How are the educational savings accounts funded?
They're direct, so maybe 90% of what you would get from the state, you have the ability to spend on a private school, supplemental education, etc.
The state says to every student?
No,
or
not to every
fund?
student. So
Okay.
particular classes of students. So students in failing schools, so that's a desperate need immediately. We offer them to students with special needs. So if your student is in one of these classes, you have the ability to use the money we would otherwise use in a traditional public school for other options.
Okay, so that's true backpack funding, really.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is direct public funding. The tax credit never becomes public money, and that was the court decision on that,
Yeah,
which
'cause
I
there was
love.
a Supreme Court ruling on
Yeah,
that.
I think you've got to have a sector of education that government doesn't touch. I really do.
I mean, at the college level, schools like Harvard, they have a bazillion-dollar endowment. They don't need money, but they'll get a lot of money. And in Arizona, is it mostly like well-off prep schools that are getting funded on that, or is it religious schools that are serving lower-income households, or what?
It's everybody. So my favorite scholarship organizations are targeted to high-need kids. We did not set an amount of money that had to go to low-income kids in that program. And I was part of that decision and thought, the market's going to run on this. These scholarship organizations are going to tend towards people without money. Let me just say that is not true, Nick. And as it turns out, people will seek ways to get these things to advantage themselves. Had I to do it all over again, I don't know what I would have done, because if you keep it just for low-income families, the political stability is less. The best thing about marketplaces is they teach us what people really want.
Right.
And the fact is, people really want these choices, and particularly in Arizona, where we let it grow all through the socioeconomic sectors. A lot of charter schools are keyed on very low-income families, which is the biggest need, and that's where my heart is. The political world actually runs in wealth, and you can like that or dislike it, but the political reality around that is, that's what's going to turn the corner for Arizona.
The early kind of charter school or school choice movement was geared towards low income,
That's
often
right.
minority students who were not being served by traditional public schools. But for middle class, upper middle class parents, what are the charters oriented around? What
Just high academic achievement, really, really internationally
so it's like 10
competitive
years of
schools.
calculus, all of that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, and what's really interesting, Nick, is that in suburban places, everybody thinks our schools are great. They look great. I love the geraniums out front. My kids are really fabulous. Yours are fabulous. We're all awesome. And then you get this school right next door to you where the kids are just kicking it. And wait, what? You're taking what? And so that over 20 years has had a massive effect in Arizona in suburban areas. And so these schools, they have wait lists all over the place. They're coming up new every year. They're the fastest growing sector of Arizona's education. And so it's just a notch above.
What are the big impediments to school choice? I mean, the first charter school law was passed in
91 in Minnesota.
Okay. I mean, since then, so we went from 0 to tens of thousands of children attending charter schools.
Right.
What are the big impediments to this radical idea just that people, regardless of their income, should be able to have a choice in where their kids go to school and some say in what's going on in that school?
Well, it depends who you are, but most of the pushback comes from those who are locked into the traditional system. So local control, meaning local school districts, were meant to serve everybody's need. Wherever you live, that's your school, that's the one you have to pay. And here's another issue. One of the things we use in these boundaries are taxes for construction. And I just have a huge problem with the amount of money that gets wasted in construction and the property taxes on that. In Arizona in particular, we build these massive facilities, 20 acres standard for elementary school, 40 acres for high school. Everybody's got a stadium. There is no way to pay people to teach what you should be able to pay them if you're going to keep building those behemoth things. Well, we do that on local property taxes.
Is that partly, though, it's often seen as a bug in the school funding system, but maybe it's the purpose that if you are raising taxes to build these big buildings, you create property taxes that effectively price out many people from that school district. So, it's a way of maintaining a public school district that's only for people who can make X amount of money, and it kind of keeps people out.
Well, that's the effect. I don't know if that's the intention, right? I don't know that people do that intentionally. I mean, it's a noble thing to want to be on the local school board, but unfortunately we gave them the job of being local monopolists. That's a bad idea, and we gave them the wrong job. And so that the biggest pushback really comes from that tradition. And when you say we're going to also have public schools that are free to move, free to hire, free to use their money the way they want to, you hear the expression, well, they're taking our money. Well, no, actually, we meant for the money to be for kids. The point at which we started making money about the system and not kids is when we allowed that culture to develop, which is local control means I get to school everybody and get paid for everybody.
You're not going to be able to go from school board to say, look, you've got it all wrong, do this. What's the best way to just kind of get around that or leave that in the past because it's not a conversation worth engaging in anymore?
That was a whole conversation before we passed Arizona's law in 1994 for charter schools. Up until that point, you asked your local school board, could we start an independent school? No is the answer. It's just basically saying, we're educating everybody. In Arizona, we said, how about this? How about we just create a state board for charter schools? So if there are teachers who want to start schools, they can do it.
And
we went around.
And the funding for that would be a portion,
or we were the first state to say all the operational funding that would go to any student is going to come out of the state general fund and it's going to follow kids. It's become a problem in Arizona because the only thing growing now in Arizona is the charter system, and that is a huge weight, sort of on the general fund. But that's easy to fix. And it was worth doing it to go around.
One of the questions that are asked about charter schools is that, well, they're not really accountable. What are the arguments for standards, either statewide or local standards or national standards?
So charter schools are accountable on every front, much more accountable in that they have a board that puts them into business. So you have to apply. We have to take our model to the board and say we're going to do good things. And somebody's going to say, why? prove that to us before you even start. Then you have to take the same assessments everybody else takes. And just a sidebar on standards, I am a huge fan of very clear, very minimal, very obvious standards. We know what it means to read and write at certain ages. We know what it means to do mathematics. I think we limit it to that, but we make sure. I just don't get all into the kerfuffle about who made them up and who. They're really, if they're rational and they're reasonable and they're about what kids need to know and not how you get there. That's a great thing. And
so how does that play out in Arizona? And how do you keep it minimal as opposed to, okay, well, it's good to read and write, but then you also have to have these courses in place, whether or not we test them, but to teach citizenship or this type of hygiene or whatever?
Right. Well, I had a superintendent say to me the other day, the biggest problem we've got in Arizona right now is we're on hiatus like everybody else. We grade our schools A through F. We use the state test. Right now, everybody sort of is an A and B school. So the new test is supposed to be honest, and we're going to get a little more serious about that. But the fact of the matter is, while we don't have a grade, the superintendent was saying, look, I've had people in my office today, I'm supposed to wear a purple shirt because of domestic violence. My kids are supposed to be in a bowling program. Oh, it's football season and the coach wants this. He said, without that assessment on the table every year with some consequence, A through F, you're going to get graded. He said, these other things just encroach, and I guarantee you, everybody loses focus.
When parents and even kids are choosing to go to a particular school, will they generate the information they need in order to make an informed choice out of consumer demand? Because I know if I have my kids and I can pick from 10 different schools, if those schools are like, just trust us, we're really awesome. Or like, that's going to be hard for me to take, but will that take the place, or will that supplement kind of these rudimentary state assessments?
So we're going to have state assessments for a while, Nick. In an ideal world, the one I'd like to live in, people would be so knowledgeable about indicators that you wouldn't need one state test.
Right.
But even if people were using different indicators, they would be based on roughly the same standards. I mean, it turns out the Pythagorean theorem matters, and it's exactly the same in Florida as it is in Arizona. And at some point you have to teach it, and you have to know how to do it if you're going to understand math. What worries me is that we won't focus enough on the choices available and that we'll start to get into process. And that does happen. You know, you have to teach this textbook, or as you say, you have to have a hygiene class or whatever. They need to be minimal, strong, honest, and that's always going to be a fight.
So talk a little bit about, it's already an issue among Republican presidential candidates, Common Core, which started out as a bunch of conservative, mostly Republican governors pushing this a decade or so ago. People like Jeb Bush, who's done very well in terms of, by most standards, or evaluations of education reform. John Kasich in Ohio. Is that the wrong way to kind of set standards, or or is it a good idea and it's just being given a bad rap in the press?
It's a good idea to have been voluntary, Nick. It really was a voluntary effort, and it was an effort to be honest. Like, if I can compare Arizona to Ohio, there's a greater likelihood, this was the theory, that we're all going to be more honest about how our kids are really doing. What creeps into it is everybody's politics. And so I have set aside the whole Common Core debate for myself and just gone around it, kind of like school choice. And you guys can all fight about that if you want to. It really has more to do with the politics of discrete ways of teaching, which really are not about the standards themselves. And I understand people's nerviness about that. I don't want you telling me I have to teach math a particular way, but I should be okay with kids in the 4th grade ought to be able to do double-digit addition. Don't care how you get there, but 44 plus 22, you ought to be able to do that.
Are the Republicans really the party of school choice, and does that matter? Or is one party better than the other? Is that the wrong way to think about school choice?
I don't know if it's the wrong way to think about it. It certainly has changed over time. So the Republicans were the original party of school choice, for sure. And I think Milton Friedman, not a Republican per se, but I had a great honor to know him in my early days when I started shaping my thinking about this, and so I'm a victim of that, a happy victim. What Milton Friedman wrote about the far superior results in a marketplace driven by what people want has informed the Republican Party about school choice. Nowadays, it's hard to tell sometimes.
Let's talk about your 2013 memoir, Simple Choices. The subtitle is Thoughts on Choosing Environments That Support Who Your Child Is Meant to Be. Talk a little bit about the personal story that you kind of work through in that, and it really gets to that question of the moral case for school choice.
Right. So I wrote that because I wanted to write it while my mother was still around as a tribute to her, and her message to us constantly was, look, you got sent here for a reason. In our family, that has to do with faith. And your obligation is to develop the talents of the kids that you have and to develop your own talents and then to contribute, to the community that you live in. My mother married my biological father, who then decided that he wanted to get into the San Francisco sort of beatnik scene. And this was a guy with everything, right? Everything you would need to contribute. And he really made a choice in his life not to do that. I didn't end up meeting him till I was in my 40s, and I tell this story in the book. I met him in a homeless shelter in San Francisco, and my objection was, look, you've got this philosophy, that's really swift, I love it. You pursued your own needs. You're actually living off of somebody else's generosity in your homeless shelter, by the way. I didn't say any of this because I'm not that bold, I just drank. And so I didn't, it's not a story about how I drank through my evening with my biological father, but the point of it was my mother chose to say, look, this is not optimal choice on my part, clearly. Let's get ourselves in another environment. So that was a decision that she made, and then I ended up with a fabulous father out of that deal. What it means to me is that your obligation over and over again, once you have kids, what you do before, rock on, that's fine. Now you've got these kids, well, you have to put them in environments that will be absolutely suited to whatever they're capable of.
And what works for one kid is not going to work for the other.
Doesn't work for another.
It's what works for one kid at one period in their life isn't going to work for them
and
later.
You're going to have to switch it up. Yeah, and they come to you with all these different aspects of who they are, which have to be embraced. It's never what you think is going to happen, but school choice meets that need precisely. And so for me, it's not just theoretical interest. For me, it's what it means to be a human being, what it means to really give people their own capacity, their ability then to give back.
I only wish that I had grown up in the schools that you're describing.
Hopefully more kids will.
Lisa, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks. Privilege.
For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie. Well, this will help increase test scores, this and that. What's the moral case for school choice?
Well, because Education is how people sort of fulfill their humanity. It's not a small thing. So the moral case is that kids have a right to become who they're capable of being. And the other moral case I would make is for teachers themselves to be able to innovate. You see a need, you see a way you could reach a bunch of kids,
Right.
You should be able to do that. And that only happens in schools that work for them. You cannot meet every child's need with a system that is just sort of, we'll get 100 more kids, we need 100 more seats, we're going to have everybody's needs met by one system, one methodology. It doesn't work.
What holds them back in a kind of traditional or a conventional public school district or model?
So if you think about a private or a charter school or a market-driven school, kids have a right to become who they're capable of being. They come to you with all these different aspects of who they are. School choice meets that need precisely.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're talking with Lisa Graham Keegan. She was the Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction from 1995 to 2001. As a legislator in the Arizona legislature before that, she...
If you and I wanted to create a school, we'd create a model first. I'd say, well, what do you think? How should we do this? We'd sit down, we'd get it on paper, we'd say, Nick's going to do this, Lisa will do this, we're going to reach the kids this way. This is a great way to teach. There's a model before there's a school. In the traditional system, there's a school, just because there's kids. And then if we get around to building a model, there's a model. It's a very, I think almost a...
Sponsored the most comprehensive charter school law in existence. She helped create Arizona state standards. She's been an advisor to John McCain, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jeb Bush, Newt Gingrich. And she is now the head of the Keegan Company and works with A for Arizona school choice and educational consultancy firms. And in 2013, you wrote a great memoir, which we'll talk about, Simple Choices. Lisa, we talk a lot when we talk about school choice about, okay,